Hi there, I haven't done any videos for a little while. I've been on holidays for a little bit. For the next few weeks, I mostly won't be reflecting on the lectionary because with my congregation, we're just going to be doing a few different topics that are to do with being part of the church. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about baptism. And I'd encourage you to have a read of Acts chapter 10, verse 34 to 48. And Matthew 28, 16 to 20. But you could also look at any of the gospel stories about the baptism of Jesus, which was what a lot of churches heard last week. There's a couple of different broad ways of thinking about baptism in the church. From the early church, families were often baptized together. Adults and children of the families would often convert together, and the whole household might become a Christian household. Baptism meant welcoming the new converts into the church, immersing them in the body of Christ. And so in the ancient church, when a baby was born, the baby would be baptized to say that they were part of the church and that they would be raised in the faith. But later on, about 400 years ago, at the beginning of the modern era, when churches in places like Germany and Britain and Switzerland were breaking away from the established church and rethinking things, some of them came to different conclusions about baptism. The modern way of thinking that was emerging in that part of the world was saying that thinking was the thing that made human beings special, and that rather than accepting the faith of the church or the faith of our family, we should each think for that for ourselves and come to our own conclusions. In a lot of the places, baptism was how you were registered as a citizen at birth, and it meant that you became part of a state church. Some of the new churches that didn't want to be tied to the state said that the baptism that happened at birth was not a real baptism, that you needed to be baptized as an adult by your own individual choice, because you had to personally decide that that was what you wanted to do. Now, I grew up with parents who were from different churches. My dad was baptized as a child in the Methodist church, and my mum was baptized as an adult in the Baptist church. So when I was a child, we moved between lots of different churches. When I was a baby, we were at a Baptist church, and so instead of being baptized as a baby, I was dedicated. My parents were saying that they intended to raise me as a Christian, so they were offering me back to God. But we changed churches a lot. So sometimes we were in the Uniting Church where children were baptized. And when we were in the Uniting Church, it was often assumed that I'd been baptized as a child, and so some adults would think that it was okay for me to have communion, but my parents would say no, he can't have communion with the other kids because he hasn't been baptized. It was all kind of confusing. I eventually chose to be baptized when I was 17 at a Church of Christ. Something that I'm really happy about as a member of the Uniting Church is that we welcome children into the church through baptism, and that we don't require people to wait until they're old enough to understand. It's so unclear when that point actually is. I think it puts a lot of pressure on young people in the church to work out when is the time for them to get baptized, when actually a lot of the time they're growing up in the faith. There's a sense in which we never fully understand what we're getting ourselves into. The only way to find out is to set out on the journey of following Christ, whether we're following on our own feet or whether we're being carried by our family. I say that also because many of us will get to points where we understand less and less. We might become less sure of things that were once easy to understand and easy to believe. It might be because of a crisis of faith, or it might be because as we get older, we just lose our ability to understand. When it's hard for us to understand, we can be carried by the faith and understanding of the body of Christ, because we've been welcomed into the body of Christ, and we don't have to do it on our own. We don't have to understand to be part of the church. We've been welcomed into the church, welcomed into Christ, whatever level of understanding we currently have. So if somebody wants to follow Jesus, if they haven't been baptized, we should offer to baptize them and welcome them in. Throughout the book of Acts, the church's understanding of who could be baptized is constantly being widened out. Initially, it's just the initial followers of Jesus who are all culturally and religiously Jewish, and then it's widened out to include Greek people who had converted to Judaism and who were following the Torah, and then it was widened out to include foreigners who hadn't been converted and hadn't taken on the Jewish customs. Eventually, even an Ethiopian eunuch is baptized, even though the Torah specifically said that eunuchs weren't welcome. Eventually, we have the story of a jail warden and his whole family being baptized together. When we baptize someone in the Uniting Church, we might completely immerse them under the water, or we might just pour some water over them. Either way is considered legitimate. I think it's better to use as much water as we can, because what it is supposed to demonstrate is that we're participating in the death and burial and resurrection of Christ. We're dying with Christ, and it's like we're being buried underneath the water and raised up to new life. Immersing someone under the water gives the best impression of that. But I know that that's not always possible. At my church, we don't really have a thing that we could do that in. We just have a small font that can contain a big bowl of water, but we couldn't immerse a whole person in that, probably not even a baby. I've heard of situations where the church is just not able to worship freely, and so they can't immerse somebody completely in water, but they might be able to splash some water on them at an opportune moment. When we baptize someone, we're baptizing them to minister to others, to represent Christ in the world, whether it's in school or in the neighborhood or in the workplace, wherever we might find ourselves in the community. We're being sent to represent Christ in the world. We're baptized and sent out to treat our neighbors with love, to share the love of God. Whenever we see or feel or taste water, we can be reminded of our baptism, reminded that we've died with Christ and that we've been raised by Christ, and that we've been baptized so that we can represent Christ in the community, sharing the love of God with others. So if you've been baptized, I'd want to encourage you to remember your baptism and remember the ministry that you've been called to. If you follow Jesus and you haven't been baptized, I'd encourage you to seek out somewhere where you can get baptized. If you want to get in touch on this platform to find somewhere where you might be able to get baptized, please feel free to do that.